Hello and welcome to my first video, which is all about scales. If you're not already one of my regular pupils, hello, I'm Michael. I'm a piano teacher and a singing teacher in Glasgow in the UK. And I am hoping to answer all of your questions about scales, as long as they fall into one of these three questions. What is a scale? Why do we play them? And how to play them? I'm hoping that should cover everything. So, part one, what is a scale? A scale is just any repeating sequence of notes. We have fairly kind of standard scales in music, and I'm mostly going to be talking about two different kinds of scales in this video: the major scale and the minor scale. That was demonstrations of each. We've also got loads of other different kinds of scales in folk music and jazz and very early classical music. We get all sorts of different scales which are called modes. In pop music and jazz and world music we get a whole load of different scales again: pentatonic scales, 6-note scales, whole tone scales, all sorts of weird and wonderful and fantastic sounding different ways of constructing music. But for now, I'm just sticking to major and minor scales. So a major or a minor scale starts on a home note or a key note and does some kind of sequence up to the next key note, or if you're making them bigger, even further along those key notes, and then back again. So taking C major as an example, because it tends to be the first one we play on a piano, I start on C, I play C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, and then I might come back down. I can make that sequence bigger. I can play, on the piano I've got 8 octaves, so I can play an 8-octave scale if I wanted to. I'm not going to, that's a bit boring. But the point is, it's a repeating sequence. It starts on a note, it goes up to that note somewhere higher or even somewhere lower if you wanted to play them down first and then back up. We don't do that very often. I don't know why. Probably because we're all right-handed and going up seems like it makes more sense. The other important thing is that wherever we start them, they have the same sound. So a lot of the time when I'm teaching my singing pupils, we talk about notes in solfa or solfege, which is a system of saying where a note is in a scale. So, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, la, sol, fa, mi, re, do. And your minor scale goes la, ti, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, and backwards. The point is that we want to be able to put that scale wherever we want to put it on the piano. So I used C as a starting note or a key note there. I want to be able to do the same thing on D and get exactly the same sound. So I've got do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, la, sol, fa, mi, re, do. And that's because I've played the same shape, the same distances between those notes, or the same intervals between those notes, if we're going to use the posh terms. And we generally describe that as tones and semitones, or sometimes, particularly in America, you'll hear them described as steps, whole steps and half steps. But I'm going to stick to tones and semitones because that's what I'm used to. So between our first and second note, we have a tone. We have one full step, which means there's always going to be some kind of a note in between that we could have played. That one there. So we have a tone, then we have a semitone. So there's nothing in between those two notes. On the piano keyboard, if I was playing that scale, and you'll be able to see them later, I played an E to an F. There's no key in between that I could have played. So tone, tone, semitone, then we're back to tone, 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 and our last one is a semitone. So we've got a smaller step when it's a semitone. If I was playing a whole tone scale, which is a thing, for a start I only end up with 6 notes in my scale before I've got back to my key note, and it's got that kind of, gets used a lot in film music for magic sequences. It's a very magical sounding scale. So I need some of those small steps to squish some extra bits in. And the minor scale I will come to another time because there's 3 different types and that's not what I want to do just now. So, part 2 Why do we play them? The simple and most basic answer is they get used in tunes and in writing music. So, for example, the tune Ode to Joy, which off the top of my head I think is a Handel tune, but I might be making it up, mostly gets known because it gets sung at Christmas. Joy to the world. I don't mean Ode to Joy, do I? I mean Joy to the world. Ode to Joy is something completely different. That's Joy to the World, and that is just a descending major scale. I've got an example here from a piece of music that seems to get played a lot on YouTube. It's called River Flows in You, and it's by Yuruma, and I'm just going to play you a tiny little excerpt of it because I'm probably not supposed to for copyright reasons or something along those lines. And in that piece, particularly in the right hand, I did play a few wrong notes in there. I do know I should have done some more practice before I made this video. Clearly, I need to practice my scales because the right hand section of that, this bit in particular, is all just one big scale. I'm noodling around that scale, up and down it, and maybe I'm not doing the full whole octave and coming back down again in a way that we would in our practice, but it's a scale. Exactly in the same way that Ode to Joy was. Joy to the World, oh my goodness, I will get that right. It's just a scale. The other thing is that they help you with your listening, your kind of understanding of music through listening skills or oral skills, if you pronounce it that way. Because I know my scales really well, I can hear the positions of the notes in a key. So if I'm trying to work out how a song goes, I've got a good idea of where everything is in that song because I've played my scales a lot. So that helps when I'm transcribing music or playing by ear or also improvising because I know my scales, I know what notes I can use and it won't sound too bad. I'm not a great improviser, so it doesn't always come out sounding as good as I'd like. The next step on from that is that they can help you with your theory. They can help with kind of musical understanding, particularly for piano playing when we're doing things like building chords. So groups of notes that are together and knowing what notes are going to fit together and how to arrange them and what notes you should be playing in any particular key. So there I did all of your sort of basic triads. They're called basic chords in C major. That one's a funny one. And back down. And I know what notes to use in those because I've played my scales. And we can practice our technique, our piano playing technique in isolation in scales because they're maybe not for beginners, but in the grand scheme of things, they're a fairly simple exercise. If nothing else, probably because, you know, if you're one of my pupils, I've started teaching you scales by about lesson 3 or 4, depending on how fast we're progressing. So you've had them in you for a good long while if you're playing seriously and you've been playing for a few years. So we can really take that as essentially a piece of music that we know really well, and it gives us a chance to try out new and different things. If we're changing a wrist position or changing where our fingers are on the keyboard, lots of people play really far off the keys and with their wrist right down there, and then they can't reach anything, and by the time you get to a G major scale and you're playing sharps and flats, you need to be able to reach the keys and you need to be far enough over them. So they're great for technical things because playing like a D flat major scale with loads of flats in it, I have to have my hand in a good position just to reach all of the keys. But on top of that, we can practice different rhythms. We can change the rhythm. We normally play them with really straight, steady rhythms, but we can play around with that, like with Joy to the World. That's a scale, but it's got some rhythm behind it, so it's turned it into a tune. So we can practice dotted rhythms. Or dotted the other way. Or swung rhythms. And all of those different things, we can practice them loud or quiet. And we can do all of those different things, and because we've got the facility, because we've been playing them for so long, and because it's, you know, in the grand scheme of things, it's not a big concerto or a huge jazz number or anything like that. It's a relatively simple exercise, so we can really check that everything's working for us. We're sat properly, we're tall on our chair, we've not put our legs crossed. Hands are in the right position, wrists are in the right position, everything's as relaxed as it can be without compromising functionality. Which brings me to the third thing, how to play scales. Well, we've already kind of covered some of that in technique. We generally play them at a sort of medium mezzo forte volume with a really steady rhythm, aiming for relaxed posture in our wrists, shoulders, elbows, neck, back, anywhere that gets tense when you're playing piano. I see so many people playing the piano like this. Looking like you're hiding from something. So it's a chance for us to check all of this. You might be able to see in the video, I've got a mirror there, which is mostly for my singing pupils. But when I put it in, oh my goodness, I started looking at my piano technique a lot more, and my arms. Started going to the gym, started looking at my arms. I'm going to have to cut that bit out. How to play scales, how to play scales. So we've got varieties in how we can play scales, particularly if we're practicing something new. I find a lot of the time if people have got quite a tight wrist, they're only ever going to be able to play loud. Suddenly if we play quietly, we have to get that finger action right. And then suddenly the wrist loosens up. All those kind of things. But on the whole, if you're starting out, you want that mezzo forte sound, that medium volume, that really steady rhythm. We don't want any, what I would describe as a thinking gap, when you're having to think about either what the note is or what the finger is. The other thing is we want them smooth, we want them legato. Well, we probably want them legato. We could practice them both ways. I tend to find a lot of beginner students, one of the first things that they encounter problems with is that smooth playing, that legato sound. Legato is the posh Italian word, we don't have to use it, but I do. Of connecting the notes up to each other without turning it into a big blur of lots of notes all sounding at once, but also not getting everything sounding like you're playing it with one finger. Because so much of how we connect music together and tell an audience what bits of tune are connected to what other bits of tune or not connected to what other bits of tune, and how we really bring a piece alive is to do with how staccato or legato, how smooth or detached we're playing those notes. Also how loud and all of those sorts of things as well. But on a really basic level, I won't believe two bits of tune are connected unless they're played smoothly between the two of them, or even two notes. I won't believe two notes are connected to each other as a musical idea if they're not played smoothly. That's not entirely true, but it's a good basic. So, playing with a reasonably firm sound, good steady rhythm, and all of the right notes, all of the right fingers, and smoothly. That's what I look for in my basic scales, and then we can start worrying about things like putting the hands together, making them faster, making them loud, quiet, changing the rhythms, all of those sorts of things, and that should be a really good beginnings of how to play scales, why to play scales, and what scale was in the first place.